She believed she was safe, while death was being quietly prepared inside her own home. Let that truth sit for a moment, because this is not a story about strangers, dark alleys, or sudden violence. From a very beginning, this documentary makes one thing clear. This was not an accident, not a moment of madness, but a betrayal built over time. Phoenix Spencer Horn believed in love. She believed in partnership, in trust, in the promise that the person beside her would never harm her. To the outside world, her life appeared normal. Quiet routines, shared spaces, everyday plans. Nothing screamed danger. Nothing hinted at what was coming. And that's exactly what makes this case so disturbing. Here's the question that refuses to stay silent. How does a plan for something so irreversible grow unnoticed inside an ordinary relationship? At what point does affection turn into something colder? And how long can a secret like that survive before the truth forces its way out? As investigators stepped in, the case initially seemed simple. Evidence was aligning. Timelines appeared to match. The truth felt close, almost within reach. For a brief moment, it seemed justice would arrive without resistance. But then, everything shifted. Just when the case appeared nearly solved, a sudden clue surfaced, and it shook the investigation to its core. This detail didn't just add information. It contradicted what everyone believed. It forced detectives to rewind, to question motives, and to realize the truth was far more calculated than first imagined. Why were certain actions taken after crime that made no emotional sense? Why did digital traces suggest performance rather than panic? Why did silence feel more intentional than grief? As the documentary unfolds, visuals linger on empty rooms, quiet streets, unanswered messages. Each one a reminder that scrutiny doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it hides behind routine, behind promises, behind love itself. This is not a story designed to be skipped. Every line pulls you deeper, not with shock alone, but with unease. The kind that stays with you. The kind that asks you to reconsider how well anyone can truly know another person. Stay with this case. Because Phoenix's story isn't just about how her life ended. It's about how trust was weaponized, and how one unexpected clue exposed a truth no one was ready to face. When I begin tracing this case, I start where every investigation must start, with Phoenix Spencer Horn herself. Not the crime, not the outcome, but the life that existed before law enforcement ever entered the picture. According to official records and family statements later referenced in court, Phoenix was 21 years old at the time of her death and living in East Kilbride, Scotland. Her name appears in documents as a young woman building an adult life, recently married, and adjusting shared domestic routines that, on paper, appeared stable. Public records confirm that Phoenix had relocated into a shared home with her husband. Friends and relatives interviewed by police describe her as socially active and close to her family, particularly her mother. This closeness becomes important later, because communication patterns between Phoenix and her family were well established and consistent, something investigators would eventually notice when those patterns changed. At this stage of the timeline, however, nothing in official statements suggests alarm. Employment and education records show Phoenix was an age where long-term plans were forming. Witness statements collected during the investigation consistently describe her as responsible, present, and engaged with her future. There were no reports filed by Phoenix alleging fear, abuse, or imminent danger prior to her death, and police records confirm no open domestic incidents connected to her name. That absence would later complicate early assumptions in the case. What stands out to me, reviewing the evidence, is how ordinary Phoenix's documented life appears. Marriage certificates, tenancy details, phone records, everything points to routine. Law enforcement summaries note no sudden withdrawals, no recorded attempts to leave, no formal complaints. From an investigative standpoint, this normalcy created a baseline that initially steered attention away from deeper scrutiny. Phoenix's digital footprint further reinforced that image. Device data later analyzed by forensic teams showed regular contact with family members, particularly her mother, through messages that followed a familiar tone and timing. This consistency, referenced in court filings, established what investigators later described as expected behavior. At the time, no one recognized its significance. Media reporting after her death often described Phoenix as loving and trusting, but I want to be precise here. Those descriptors come from family interviews and memorial statements, not assumption. What the verified evidence confirms is simpler and more unsettling. Phoenix was living a life that gave no outward signal of collapse, no warnings, no visible fractures. From my perspective, this is what makes the background so critical. Crimes like this don't begin with violence. They begin with invisibility. Phoenix's life, as documented, blended seamlessly into its surroundings. That made later discoveries more difficult, not easier. Police reports note that when concerns were eventually raised, they were not about Phoenix's behavior, but about her absence. That distinction matters. It tells us that until something stopped abruptly, Phoenix's life followed a pattern others trusted. As I move forward in this case, one detail continues to echo. Investigators did not initially suspect that the danger was already inside the home. That realization came later, triggered by something small, specific, and deeply unsettling, which would soon force the entire investigation to change direction. When I move from Phoenix Benselhorn's background into her relationship, the tone of the investigation shifts, not because of visible warning signs, but because of how few there were. According to marriage records and tenancy documents later reviewed by police, Phoenix and her husband were living together as a recently married couple in East Kilbride. On paper, their relationship followed a normal path. Shared residence, shared routines, and no official complaints logged with authorities before her death. Police statements confirmed there were no prior reports of domestic disturbance associated with their address. This absence played a critical role in how the early investigation unfolded. Officers responding later would note that nothing in the system flagged this home as high risk. From an investigative perspective, that lack of history created an assumption of stability that would only be questioned much later. In the weeks leading up to Phoenix's death, verified phone records and witness accounts show she remained in regular contact with her family. Messages were sent frequently and followed familiar patterns, especially with her mother. These records were later presented in court as a baseline for normal communication behavior. At the time, nothing in those exchanges raised immediate concern for relatives or friends. What becomes important here is what did not happen. According to official timelines, there were no sudden departures, no requests for help, and no reports of fear made to friends or authorities. That silence would later become one of the most troubling elements of the case. As an observer reviewing the evidence, I find that silence almost louder than conflict. It suggests control through normalcy rather than chaos. The turning point begins quietly. Investigators later confirmed that Phoenix was last known to be alive inside the shared home. This detail is grounded in forensic findings and timeline reconstructions presented during legal proceedings. There is no verified evidence of outside involvement, no indication she left voluntarily, and no credible sightings after that point. After Phoenix was no longer seen or heard from, what followed raised questions. Subtle at first, family members noticed changes in communication patterns. Messages continued, but the tone and timing did not fully align with what they knew. This observation came directly from witness statements given to police, and would later be supported by digital forensic analysis. Law enforcement records show that during this period, no missing person report was immediately filed, largely because communication had not completely stopped. This delay unintentionally allowed crucial time pass. From my perspective, reviewing the sequence, this gap explains how the situation remained hidden long enough for the case to take a darker turn. When authorities were eventually contacted, inconsistencies emerged. Statements given did not fully match digital records or physical evidence later recovered from a residence. These discrepancies, documented in investigative summaries, began to erode the initial assumption that nothing unusual had occurred inside the home. What stands out to me is how methodical this progression appears when reconstructed. There was no single dramatic event leading authorities to the truth. Instead, it was the accumulation of small, verified details, message timing, behavior patterns, and forensic confirmation that exposed reality of what had taken place. By the time police fully understood the sequence of events, the relationship itself became central to the investigation, not as a backdrop, but as the primary setting of the crime. And just as that realization settled in, investigators uncovered specific piece of evidence that reframed intent entirely, an element that would soon redefine the case and lead directly into forensic findings that followed. When I focus on the day Phoenix Spencerhorn was killed, the investigation becomes precise, almost clinical, because this part of the case is built almost entirely on verified timelines, forensic evidence, and official records. According to police reports and court filings, Phoenix was last confirmed alive inside the home she shared with her husband. That confirmation is based on digital data, location analysis, and subsequent forensic findings presented during legal proceedings. There is no record of Phoenix leaving the property that day. No transport data. No confirmed sightings. Law enforcement later established that whatever happened occurred within the shared residence, a conclusion supported by scene analysis and forensic reconstruction. At the time, however, this was not immediately obvious. Emergency services were not contacted right away. This delay is clearly documented in police timelines and became one of the first red flags once officers began reconstructing the sequence of events. When authorities were eventually alerted, they were responding not to an active emergency, but to a situation that already unfolded hours earlier. Inside the home, officers encountered evidence that contradicted early verbal accounts. Forensic teams later confirmed signs of serious incident, supported by physical findings documented in official reports. These findings place a time of death earlier than initially suggested, a discrepancy that would later become central to the prosecution's case. What stands out to me, reviewing these records, is how the truth did not arrive all at once. It emerged in fragments, timestamps, digital logs, physical traces, each one narrowing the window of uncertainty. According to court summaries, Phoenix's injuries were consistent with an intentional act rather than an accident, a determination made by medical experts and accepted by the court. Phone data plays a critical role on this day. Digital forensic analysis showed activity from Phoenix's device after investigators believe she was already deceased. This fact was not speculation. It was established through expert testimony and accepted as evidence. That discovery alone forced investigators to reconsider earlier assumptions and focus more sharply on what accessed their phone and when. Witness statements from family members also became relevant here. They told police that messages received that day did not fully align with Phoenix's usual communication style. While subtle, those inconsistencies were logged and later supported by technical analysis, giving investigators reason to question the authenticity of the messages being sent. From my perspective, this is where the case takes a disturbing turn, not because of a single dramatic revelation, but because of deliberate sequence. The actions taken after Phoenix's death, as outlined in police and court records, did not match the urgency or transparency expected in such circumstances. That gap between reality and reporting became impossible to ignore. When officers formally examined the timeline, the day of the crime stopped being just a date. It became a controlled environment, shaped by access, opportunity, and verified actions. There was no evidence of intrusion, no sign of a third party. The focus narrowed completely. As this section of the investigation closed, one fact stood firm. The events of that day were not chaotic or unclear. They were structured, traceable, and supported by evidence. And just as investigators believed they understood what happened, attention shifted toward why, a question driven by motive, behavior after crime, and details that would soon surface during interrogation and forensic review. The moment the authorities entered the home is documented in official police reports as one of immediate gravity. According to law enforcement records, officers were called to the residence after repeated absence, and unusual messages raised concern. Witness statements from family members, later submitted in court filings, indicated that Phoenix Spencerhorn had not responded to her usual communications, which triggered the call. When officers arrived, the scene confirmed that a serious incident had occurred. Forensic reports clearly note the location and position the body inside the shared residence. Investigators meticulously recorded the scene, noting evidence that aligned with the previously established timeline from digital device analysis. This evidence provided immediate confirmation that the death had occurred within the home rather than outside, eliminating early speculation of third-party involvement. Medical examiner documentation and court summaries detail the severity of the injuries. These official reports confirm multiple forms of trauma, consistent with intentional harm. The timing of death was established using both forensic pathology and corroborating digital timestamps from Phoenix's devices. This alignment of multiple evidence streams would later prove critical in reconstructing the events accurately. Digital forensic analysis also revealed activity on Phoenix's phone after the estimated time of death, a detail carefully noted in both police and court records. Investigators determined that these messages were not consistent with her normal communication style, a fact verified through witness interviews and message history. This inconsistency became an important factor in focusing the investigation on those who had direct access to her devices. Family statements submitted to law enforcement emphasized the sudden and alarming absence of Phoenix. These verified observations establish context for the timeline of discovery. Police reports note that her husband, the primary resident of the home, was present during the initial discovery, and his statements were carefully compared against physical and digital evidence. Discrepancies in his account were later highlighted in official reports, providing early investigative leads. The physical evidence collected by forensic teams included fingerprints, traces of activity in key areas of the residence, and objects connected to the act. Each of these findings was cataloged and cross-referenced with timelines reconstructed from CCTV, mobile device logs, and witness accounts. Court filings later confirmed that these detailed records were used to establish both opportunity and sequence of events for the prosecution. What stands out in reviewing the verified material is how methodical the documentation was, and how every element of the discovery built toward an undeniable conclusion. Nothing was assumed. Every claim made in court was supported by evidence or witness verification. This methodical approach highlights the stark contrast between routine appearances in home and the underlying reality of the crime. From my perspective, the discovery of Phoenix's body was more than a confirmation of a death. It was a first point where investigators began to connect patterns of deception, access, and control. The sequence of evidence immediately suggested that the investigation needed to move beyond surface observations into deeper forensic reconstruction. As the scene was secured and the body examined, investigators began to uncover subtle but critical inconsistencies in statements, timelines, and digital records, details that would soon force a full reevaluation of both motive and method, bridging directly into forensic analysis that would shape the case. The investigation into Phoenix Spencer Horn's death began the moment officers secured the residence. Official police reports confirmed that initial responders were met with a scene that immediately indicated foul play. Forensic teams were called to document every surface, every object, and every trace that could reconstruct what occurred inside the home. Court filings later emphasized the precision with which evidence was collected, establishing a chain of custody that would be critical for the prosecution. Investigators first examined the timeline. Digital records from Phoenix's phone and home devices were analyzed to determine the last verified moments she was alive. Law enforcement reports show that time-stamped and geolocation data created a narrow window, which was cross-referenced with statements from family members who had been in regular contact with her. These verified patterns exposed discrepancies between when she was last seen and when activity from her phone occurred, a detail that would prove pivotal. Witness statements collected by police indicated that Phoenix had maintained regular communication with her mother and other close relatives. These statements, later submitted as part of court record, helped investigators reconstruct what should have been her typical day. That baseline, combined with forensic evidence, allowed the team to identify deviations, moments that suggested deliberate interference with her communications. According to law enforcement summaries, officers focused quickly on the husband as a primary resident of the home. His initial account of events, documented in official police interviews, was immediately cross-checked against physical evidence. Discrepancies were noted. Movement patterns inside the house, the sequence of digital activity, and the timing of emergency calls did not align. Investigators flagged these inconsistencies and prioritized them in the early stages of the investigation. Forensic reports detail the examination of the residence itself. Surfaces were swabbed for DNA. Fingerprints were cataloged, and trace evidence was collected to confirm the sequence of events. This work, later cited in court filings, established both opportunity and control. Each verified finding reinforced a growing picture. The crime occurred entirely within home, by someone with intimate access. What becomes striking, reading through these reports, is a methodical approach investigators took. Nothing was assumed. Every piece of evidence, text messages, timestamps, family witness statements, physical traces, was carefully documented. According to official summaries, it became clear early that the apparent normalcy of Phoenix's life masked reality only visible through rigorous examination. Another key element emerged through digital forensic analysis. Messages sent from Phoenix's phone after the estimated time of death raised immediate questions. Law enforcement documents confirmed that this evidence was verified by experts and corroborated by family statements. It created the first tangible lead that suggested manipulation and intentional deception, not random circumstance. From my perspective, the most compelling aspect of the investigation is how each verified detail revealed control and premeditation. It was not a chaotic scene left to chance. Every signal, every trace, every inconsistency pointed to someone orchestrating events with knowledge and intent. As the initial investigation progressed, one undeniable truth became clear. The physical evidence and digital records were converging to form a portrait of deliberate planning. And yet, even as detectives pieced together this framework, a single overlooked clue would soon emerge, one that threatened to challenge their assumptions and redirect the investigation in ways no one expected. The investigation into Phoenix Spencerhorn's death quickly narrowed its focus, guided entirely by verified evidence and methodical reconstruction. Law enforcement reports confirmed that initial attention fell on the primary resident of the home, the husband. This was not an assumption, but a logical step grounded in access, opportunity, and proximity. Police timelines clearly established that no one else had consistent access to the residence during the critical period, a fact confirmed through tenancy records, digital logs, and CCTV analysis. Official statements from family members, submitted to authorities, reinforced this focus. Phoenix's mother and close relatives described regular patterns of communication that had abruptly changed, consistent with the window of her disappearance. These verified disruptions became one of the first points of scrutiny for investigators. Law enforcement documents emphasized that these patterns were cross-referenced with phone metadata and mobile device activity, revealing inconsistencies in reported events versus recorded data. Forensic reports played a critical role in solidifying the suspect profile. Analysis of the residence revealed physical traces aligning with controlled entry and movement within the home. These findings were documented in official case files and presented in court as evidence establishing that the person with intimate knowledge of the home environment had the ability to commit the act without immediate detection. The husband's statements during initial interviews were carefully cataloged in police reports. Investigators noted discrepancies between verbal accounts and verified evidence from digital devices, timestamps, and forensic observations. These inconsistencies were not ignored. They were systematically logged and later referenced in court filings. The contrast between recorded behavior and reported actions provided law enforcement with the earliest indications of intentional misrepresentation. Digital forensic analysis revealed further layers of evidence. Messages sent from Phoenix's device after the estimated time of death were verified by experts and cross-checked with witness accounts. This detail, noted in both investigative reports and court documents, highlighted manipulation and deliberate interference. The investigators treated it as a significant lead, suggesting that the person controlling access to her devices required scrutiny beyond standard questioning. Additional verification came from cross-referencing background checks, prior interactions with authorities, and personal records. Police summaries confirmed that no other individual had the same level of unsupervised access to Phoenix's routines, devices, and private spaces. That convergence of verified evidence, digital activity, physical traces, witness statements, narrowed the investigation with remarkable precision. From my perspective, the identification of the suspect demonstrates the importance of patience and attention to detail. Nothing was rushed, nothing assumed. Each piece of evidence built upon the last, creating a clear trajectory that led authorities to the person who had both motive and capability. The methodical collection of facts prevented speculation from clouding judgment. By the conclusion of this phase, law enforcement had confirmed the husband as the primary suspect through verified, cross-referenced evidence. But even as this focus solidified, investigators were faced with subtle contradictions. Small anomalies in timelines, overlooked messages, and traces of activity that had initially appeared irrelevant. These details hinted at deeper layers, signaling that the next phase of the investigation will reveal truths no one had anticipated, forcing the inquiry to shift in unexpected directions. The trial of Phoenix Spencer Horn's husband began with a focus on evidence meticulously collected during the investigation. Court records show that the prosecution relied heavily on forensic analysis, digital device data, and verified witness statements to reconstruct the sequence of events. Every piece of evidence was cross-referenced with law enforcement reports, ensuring that the narrative presented in court rested entirely on verified facts. Medical examiner reports were central to the case, detailing the injuries Phoenix sustained. These documents, submitted as official evidence, confirmed the cause of death and aligned with the timeline established through phone metadata and witness accounts. The prosecution highlighted these findings, presenting them alongside digital logs showing activity from Phoenix's devices after her death, verified by forensic experts, which indicated manipulation and deliberate interference. Court filings confirmed that investigators used detailed timelines to show opportunity and access. The husband, as primary resident of the home, had unsupervised access during the critical period. Forensic reports emphasized the placement of traces and objects within the home, establishing control over the environment at the time of the crime. Every assertion in court was backed by physical evidence and corroborated by official records. Witness statements played a critical role in reinforcing the digital evidence. Family members testified to patterns of communication that were broken during the period of Phoenix's disappearance. Police interview records confirmed these observations, showing that investigators could verify not just the absence of contact, but also inconsistencies in messages that were allegedly sent from Phoenix's phone. This convergence of statements and forensic evidence strengthened the prosecution's case. Digital forensics also revealed subtle anomalies that became pivotal in court. Verified records showed that messages and device activity continued after the estimated time of death, but these messages did not match Phoenix's known communication patterns. Law enforcement and expert testimony confirmed that these inconsistencies were deliberate, supporting the conclusion that the husband manipulated information to conceal the crime. The defense, according to court transcripts, attempted to challenge the timeline and question the reliability of digital records. However, official reports and expert testimony confirmed the accuracy of the data, and cross-referencing with physical evidence left little room for doubt. Every timeline, every trace, every statement pointed toward premeditation and deliberate action. On the day of sentencing, court records show that the husband was convicted of murder and additional charges related to obstructing justice. The judge referenced verified evidence from forensic teams, digital experts, and witness statements in the sentencing remarks, emphasizing the methodical nature of the crime and the intentional concealment that followed. Sentencing documents confirmed a life sentence, with minimum term before eligibility for parole clearly defined. From my perspective, the trial demonstrates the power of precise, verified evidence. When investigators and prosecutors build a case strictly on documented facts, physical traces, digital timestamps, and sworn statements, the narrative became undeniable. It shows how truth can emerge layer by layer, even when initial appearances suggest normalcy. Even as a conviction concluded, investigators noted unresolved questions about small discrepancies in timelines and overlooked digital clues. These minor anomalies hinted that while justice had been served, the case contained layers that might reveal more about planning, motive, and control. Truths that would guide the next phase of review and reflection. The aftermath of Phoenix Spencer Horn's death extended far beyond immediate investigation. Law enforcement reports confirmed that once the husband was taken into custody, officers and forensic teams began a thorough review of the residence, digital devices, and records to ensure no detail had been overlooked. Every piece of evidence previously collected was re-examined, verified, and cross-referenced with witness statements to support the prosecution and to clarify unresolved questions. Court documents and media reporting show the case immediately drew attention from local authorities and the broader community. Police press releases emphasized both the meticulous nature of the investigation and the serious consequences of domestic crimes, highlighting verified findings without speculation. These statements serve as a public record, ensuring transparency and accountability throughout the legal process. Family statements, submitted to law enforcement and later read during court proceedings, reflected the abrupt rupture in their lives. Verified testimonies document how relatives had to adjust the loss while cooperating fully with investigation. Investigators noted that family cooperation was critical in establishing timelines, confirming communications, and providing context for the digital forensic analysis that formed the backbone of a case. Forensic experts continue to analyze Phoenix's devices and the home environment. Official reports indicate that additional findings, though not central to the trial, clarified aspects of postmortem activity. These analyses were critical in confirming that digital messages sent after Phoenix's death were manipulated, a fact verified by cross-referencing metadata, IP logs, and timestamp communications. These discoveries reinforce the level of premeditation involved. From my perspective, the most profound aspect of the aftermath is how verification of every detail affected both legal outcomes and public understanding. Police reports, court filings, and forensic records created a multi-layered account that left little room for doubt. It also highlighted a persistent reality. Crimes of this nature leave traces not only in physical evidence, but in emotional and social structures surrounding the victim. Official records show that the husband's conviction prompted procedural reviews within local law enforcement agencies. These reports document evaluations of investigative methods, particularly regarding domestic crime response and the use of digital forensic evidence. The verified findings from Phoenix's case became a reference for improving protocols, ensuring future investigations could be more precise and responsive. Community impact was noted in verified media reports and press releases. Neighborhoods, local organizations, and charities mobilized memorial efforts, while statements confirmed by police acknowledge the role of collective vigilance in identifying unusual patterns of communication and behavior. The combined effect of these verified actions extended the reach of the investigation into education and public awareness about domestic safety and crime prevention. Even after trial and conviction, law enforcement records indicate minor anomalies in digital timelines, and device usage remain under review. These small inconsistencies, although not altering the legal outcome, suggested further lines of inquiry that could deepen understanding of the premeditated actions. From my perspective, it is in these overlooked details that investigators often find the quietest but most significant truths. As the official aftermath unfolded, Phoenix's death became more than a single case. It revealed patterns, exposed vulnerabilities, and left investigators and the community asking deeper questions about trust, control, and prevention. And yet, even as systems were refined and justice was enforced, one lingering detail from the digital records continued to unsettle authorities, hinting that the story, verified as it may seem, still contains secrets waiting to be fully understood. As the case of Phoenix Spencer Horn reaches its official conclusion, the verified evidence leaves a stark and undeniable portrait. Court documents, forensic reports, and law enforcement records together confirm the trajectory of the crime. From the meticulous planning to the deliberate concealment, every timeline, every message, every trace left behind was reconstructed with precision, leaving no room for speculation. Official records highlight the systematic nature of the investigation. Digital forensic analysis, cross-checked against witness statements, verified how the sequence of events unfolded inside the home. Police summaries show that messages sent after Phoenix's death were examined in detail, metadata verified, and patterns compared with her normal communications. These steps were not narrative embellishments. They were verified facts that build a chain of evidence leading directly to conviction. Family testimonies, submitted during trial and recorded in law enforcement files, added a human layer to the factual reconstruction. They provided context for timelines, confirmed deviations in communication, and verified daily routines. These statements became pivotal in demonstrating both the opportunity and the unnatural interruption of Phoenix's established patterns. From my perspective, these records underline how closely ordinary life can mask extraordinary danger when examined through careful documentation. Forensic reports reaffirm the sequence of actions, supporting what investigators already suspected. The death was intentional, deliberate, and executed by someone with intimate access. Official filings note the alignment of physical evidence, digital records, and witness observations. Every fact pointed toward premeditation and planning, verified repeatedly in court testimony and expert analysis. Even the smallest discrepancies became critical during the trial and in post-conviction review. Reports note subtle anomalies in the timeline, overlook signals in device usage, and minor contradictions in early statements. While they did not alter the legal outcome, these details offered investigators insight into calculated nature of the crime, showing that even meticulously planned acts leave trace evidence when analyzed rigorously. From my perspective, the closing phase of the investigation underscores the power of verification. It demonstrates how evidence, when properly collected and analyzed, creates a narrative that cannot be undone. It is not emotion that drives conclusions here. It is fact, meticulously gathered and confirmed. And yet, even in a case with such clarity, small details remain. Tiny, verified anomalies a hint at the depth of planning and control involved. Official records also document the broader impact. Law enforcement agencies reviewed protocols for domestic incidents, digital forensics, and investigative timelines in response to lessons learned from the case. Public statements verified by police show that these adjustments were intended to ensure future investigations could identify subtle warning signs more efficiently. Reflecting on Phoenix's case, I am struck by how ordinary life, routine, domestic, seemingly secure, was interwoven with deliberate, hidden violence. The verified evidence leaves no doubt about the outcome, yet also illuminates how patterns of normalcy can obscure the truth until carefully reconstructed. And yet, even as the records close, one verified element remains unresolved. Minor inconsistencies in the timeline and digital logs suggest that the full story of planning and premeditation might still hold secrets, subtle traces that law enforcement documented but did not fully explain. These lingering details remind us that even solved cases can leave questions, prompting further investigation and reflection.